Hey guys, this video is sponsored by SteelSeries, so make sure to stick around after the end to find out how you can get a discount on your next order. I've always been kind of fascinated with alternate versions of games and console ports, and with a lot of these you're actually getting vastly different experiences depending on the platform you're playing on. I mean, compare something like Quake 3 on the PlayStation 2 for instance to Quake 3 on the PC, or Deus Ex, Half-Life or Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Another interesting example is Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, which was released on the Xbox 360, the PC and the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox, with there being 3 completely different versions on each platform. All 3 of these were also worked on by different developers, but still including Ubisoft in some capacity. And I think the only thing that's been as good for the Tom Clancy brand as Ubisoft has is the invention of print media.
Airspace is secure.
Advanced Warfighter is one of the earliest games released for the Xbox 360, coming out way back in 2006. Which makes the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox version kind of unique too. I mean, seeing a game that came out when the 6th generation of consoles were really at the end of their tether. In each version, the story is also identical. Set in the futuristic year of 2013, lol, the Canadian Prime Minister and the US President travel to a summit in Mexico. But wouldn't you know it, these guys had to travel there in the middle of a coup, which means everyone's lives are now at stake and only Captain Scott Mitchell, which might be the most generic sounding name ever, has to go in there with his ghost team to save the day.
Target down.
You'll move through the streets of Mexico, getting into gunfights with rebel soldiers, watch the US Embassy explode, escort a tank crew through hostile territory, and even go lone wolf on a few solo missions. All before being a bad enough dude to rescue the US and the Mexican president, as you stop the rebels and arrest their leaders. The whole rebel forces thing, I mean, it ain't the most original story, and it does just feel like they pulled the nationality of the enemy forces out of a hat. I mean, it was either going to be Mexicans, Russians, or Middle Easterns, wasn't it? And I really look forward to the day that we get a Tom Clancy game that's got Australians as the villains.
Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest.
Aside from all of that, there's the MacGuffin, an item called the football, which is an EMP device that the rebels have stolen. And getting that thing back is enough motivation to keep things moving along.
I have a visual.
But look, I don't think anyone really plays these kind of games for their stories, and all of the exposition is given away by little video screens that pop up in the right hand side of the screen, making sure it never even takes control away from the player.
Roger that. Stand by.
It's the gameplay though where it matters most, and what makes this thing so interesting is that it really does differ greatly on each platform. With the 360 version, I'd argue, probably being the best of the bunch. And really, if you're only going to play one version of this game, well, then this is the one to go for. Developed by Ubisoft Paris, I gotta say that this is probably the most fun I've had playing a console shooter in recent memory. Which is even more funny to say considering that now this thing is about 15 years old.
Target down.
I would have easily finished it in a single sitting, only I had adult commitments to attend to, along with basic human urges like eating and sleeping. But it was just such a smooth experience from start to finish, and I think the few minor problems the whole thing has are just overshadowed by the multitude of things that it does well. Obviously, you've seen the footage at this point, and you can see that it's a third-person shooter.
Of course!
It does have the option to be played in a first-person mode, but it is really meant to be played in third-person, utilizing cover and popping out to take shots at enemies. Like a lot of other Tom Clancy games, it's also focused around squad-based combat with 3 other ghosts at your command, who, thankfully, actually listen to you, and are able to carry out orders in a timely manner.
Firing.
Giving orders is done mostly with the D-pad. You press up to send your squad to a specific location and down to get them to follow you.
Back on me. Reloading now.
With left or right, you can switch through the available units under your command and also choose if they're in assault or recon mode with the left bumper. And a tactical map is available in case you want to get a better idea of the layout of your surroundings. When you arrive at a rally point, you can even swap in different kinds of soldiers to assist for each mission. One of the guys in particular walks around with a missile launcher over his shoulder the entire time, and it is kind of hilarious watching him use it to take out ground troops.
Attack.
I mean, it's like swatting a fly with an anvil.
Destroy. Fuck you!
The other thing that I really like too is if your buddies take too much damage, instead of being dropped like a bag of shit, now they're just downed and can be revived if you're quick enough.
Thanks for saving me.
It just doesn't bog the player down and it keeps the whole thing moving along. And better than all of that, the game actually has fair checkpoints throughout the missions. So you're not going to be replaying large chunks over and over because some asshole at an MG nest blew the top of your goddamn head off. Yeah, hold on to that thought.
Mitchell!
15-something years later, the AI in this thing, I think, still holds up. And these guys are more than capable of keeping themselves alive, which means you can worry about your own well-being and not spend all of your time worrying about theirs. Compared to the PC version, which we'll get to soon enough, which is a pretty hardcore tactical shooter, the combat here is a lot more forgiving, at least on the default difficulty anyway. The way that damage seems to work here is that you're able to sustain a couple of direct hits before death, and the way you'll know that if it's a direct hit is because the entire screen seems to flash for a brief second. However, if the enemy's lucky enough to score a headshot, well, it's lights out and that's game over. You lose, good day sir. Still though, it is a lot more forgiving than the PC version, which is a good thing, because it means you don't get outright punished for trying to play around with different tactics and approaches. Again, like the PC and the PS2 version, it also follows the same storyline. It's just the missions are entirely different in design and structure. They do have the exact same premise, it's just the actions you carry out are entirely different, and in almost every single way, they're just much more fun to play through. I mean, as an example, in the second mission, when you're moving through the streets of Mexico, you're not just dropped off in the chopper now and sent on your merry way. This time it opens up with a whole sequence in the chopper where you've got to mow down a bunch of guys with a minigun. In the 6th mission, there's a bit in the PC version where you have to shoot down these 2 attack choppers, which is not only highly unrealistic, but also just a needless drain on your resources. Here on the 360 though, you can now shoot these things down with a nearby machine gun, so you're not wasting your precious ammo. And it almost kind of reminds me of Modern Warfare, before Modern Warfare was even a thing. I mean, this thing came out in 2006, right? Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out in 2007, so in a lot of ways, Advanced Warfighter kind of feels like a bit of a pioneer, featuring the kind of really awesome scripted action sequences that wouldn't have felt out of place in the COD games. There's much more of a focus on using vehicles as well. That prologue mission that lets you set a chopper loose on a warehouse kind of feels like it's a kill streak in Call of Duty. Just kind of hovers out front the building while it mows everyone down, and it's awesome. In the second mission, there's a section where you've got an APC at your disposal and can even use it for makeshift cover as it clears the streets in between reaching your next objective, and that's kind of awesome too. During a mission where you've got to rescue a tank crew, controlling them as they escape this facility is just way more fun to play through, and the tanks actually serve an offensive purpose other than just being these expensive bullet shields. I just think this is a much more enjoyable version of the same game in almost every single way, and as long as you don't mind the fact that it is fundamentally different, being more of an action shooter as opposed to a very crushing tactical one, I'd say that this is the version to go with. I think it's still a really good looking game as well. I was running this on my Xbox Series X and the game plays super smooth and it still looks great. It's kind of funny too that I've spent more time playing games that came out 15 years ago on my Series X than I have playing current games. There's a real contrast between light and shadow, giving the game a highly stylized look, and the amount of detail in some of these city environments is still really impressive. Animations are realistic and smooth, and the explosions and other effects all look great. Like in the way that dirt is kicked up when a chopper comes into land, for instance. And I really love the way you can see your character loading in an individual rocket with the missile launcher in between each shot. The nighttime levels are actually genuinely dark, you know, like actual nighttime. You'll have to use night vision goggles here almost the entire time, and it's like they've made these goggles purposefully hard to see shit with as well, to kind of increase that realism and immersion. I mean, the last few missions are so dark, you'd have a better time trying to spot grains of rice in someone's intestinal tract during a colonoscopy.
We have you coming in loud and clear, Captain.
The music throughout the game is also actual music, instead of just the same 2 or 3 songs repeated over and over ad nauseum in the PC port. Even then though, I struggle to call that stuff music, because it's really just a 10-second loop of different grinding and humming sounds over and over. This is clearly a AAA game that's had a lot of money, time, and talent put into it, and a lot like Jennifer Aniston, it's aged pretty damn well.
Negative.
The downside to this version is that it is definitely a much more linear game than the PC version. The missions on the PC are these giant areas with your objectives speckled throughout the map, and you had numerous ways in which you could get there. You could cut through alleys, you could go through the insides of buildings, and there was never only one way forward. The 360 version though does feel a lot more limited in that regard, and a lot of the time you've only really got one way to move forward, which does result in some pretty lame bottlenecked areas where you're basically just running straight into a position that's been fortified by the enemy. Going too far off the beaten path is going to cause the game to fail you for leaving the mission area, which, to be honest, is kinda horse shit.
You're moving out of the op area, Captain.
I can understand why some people might prefer the PC version to this one because they really are completely different on a base level, and the 360 version really does feel like Advanced Warfighter if it was directed by Michael Bay. But that's the balance that I think this version manages to do really well. It has a good mix of feeling challenging without being too difficult, along with being more explosive, cinematic, and just way more action-packed. All that Mitchell is missing here is a cigar to chomp down on, and a whole heap of cheesy one-liners whenever he blows someone away.
Bitchin'.
So if you want a well-paced, enjoyably challenging game where the mechanics are a lot more cohesive with genuinely good AI, well, then I say go with the 360 version. Even though it really is like chalk and cheese, apples and oranges, and blondes and brunettes. But hey, I mean, some guys prefer blondes to brunettes, so we may as well talk about it anyway, right?
Mitchell! Mitchell!
Alright, so the PC version wasn't developed by the A-team at Ubisoft. Instead, it's a developer called Grin, whose only real claim to fame is the video game adaptation of two films, Wanted and Terminator Salvation, which they turned into two terrible video games. Compared to the 360 version, like I said, this one is more of a tactical shooter in line with the original Ghost Recon games, which prioritize slow movement, high lethality, taking your time and playing much more sensibly. Your weapons have burst and single fire modes, and leaning around corners and using precise aim is a must. You can give your squad orders again on the tactical map, which shows the entire layout of the area, along with enemy positions. You can even see the world through their eyes, well, their helmet cam anyway, which has pretty much no use whatsoever, just outside of being a cool gimmick. In certain missions, you're given a drone which can highlight enemies, along with having them show up on the tactical map. So you're never entirely left in the dark as to where these threats are coming from. A lot of the environments also seem to be designed with multiple routes, giving you opportunities to flank the enemies from different angles, which is the main improvement I think it has over the 360 version. There's even some pretty cool physics with the destructible vehicles, where you can shoot out windows and individual tires. And all of this is a good idea in principle, except for one massive catastrophic failure, and that's how fucking bad this friendly AI is. Honestly, I'm convinced that the people who gave this game good scores back when it first came out didn't play past the first couple of missions, because at times this thing is borderline broken. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the AI in the older Tom Clancy games is better than the stuff we get in this one, and all of the customization and freedom in where you can tell these guys to go and what to do doesn't really mean a damn thing if they're not actually able to do it. Even when they manage to carry out an order, they just do it with such little purpose, like they kind of casually meander over to the spot where you've ordered them to, and half the time they don't even move to the spot itself, they'll inexplicably stop short for no reason.
In position, standing by.
Oh, good for you!
They're also really inconsistent in dealing with the enemies. Sometimes one of your guys will wipe out half a dozen without breaking a sweat, but then other times a single rebel's gonna clean up your entire squad. I understand that this is a tactical squad-based shooter and you are supposed to be keeping an eye on your boys, I mean, their lives are in your hands. But if they can't do something as simple as going where you tell them to, well, it just kind of feels like you're babysitting a bunch of kids, as opposed to leading this group of highly trained soldiers. I mean, if I had an option in-game to tell them to not shit their pants, it wouldn't have surprised me. Having all these alternate routes in between buildings is often kinda pointless, because most of the time the AI can't pathfind their way through them, and instead just prefer to run down the main roads, at which point they may as well have an air raid siren tied around their necks, announcing they're present to the entire world. At one point, one of my guys got stuck simply trying to walk past a shipping container, and he got caught in this infinite loop of just walking into the wall over and over. A couple of missions later, the same thing happened, and the funny thing was, I couldn't even go back to get him, because the game said that I was leaving the designated mission area. Yeah, thanks.
You're leaving the mission area. Get back in the war, Mitchell.
At one point, these guys couldn't even walk up a goddamn hill. Like, they literally could not master the obstacle of a sloped gradient. Also at the end of this mission, the task of simply hopping on a chopper was too much to deal with as well.
And how was it?
You know when you see a video of a zookeeper coming out and holding hands with a monkey, and the monkey just kind of stands there looking around at the crowd all confused until the zookeeper finally leads it away again? Well, that's what this feels like.
Reforming.
The enemies aren't all that brilliant either though, and they're only a threat because they kill you so quickly. They never outsmart or outmaneuver you, and you'll often just see them standing there when someone right next to them got killed, completely oblivious. The PC version I think also kind of forgets sometimes that it's supposed to be a tactical shooter and not an action one. It's got a weird mix of these realistic mechanics with things like the slow movement speed, combined with just dumb action video game shit. Like having to shoot down those choppers with your assault rifle, it's like something out of an entirely different game. They also like to put enemies on machine gun turrets, which is again a bit of a horrible idea in a game where you're often killed in a single shot.
Damn it! Mitchell, what's your status?
Enemies often seem to frequently survive headshots. They'll get knocked on their ass after catching a round to the head, only to then get right back up for seconds, which in a realistic shooter also makes no sense. There's obviously no health kits or anything like that, but if you take too much damage, you can just restart your last checkpoint and get full health again, which I outright had to rely on to get through some of these later missions. There's no quick saving, which is fair enough. I mean, that's kind of part and parcel for this kind of genre, but it does mean that you're going to get pretty familiar with some of the checkpoints in these games. What I'm saying is that you're going to die here a lot, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the harsh reality is that the game just doesn't like you. But don't worry, because I do. It's not the best looking game either, which is kind of odd. I mean, this thing came out in 2006, and by this point we'd had games like Far Cry, Half-Life 2 and Fear, which all looked leaps and bounds better. Advanced Warfighter just looks flat in comparison. Doesn't really have any memorable lighting or environments, and everything just looks so drab and dull. It's like the entire screen has been covered in sand and dust, which I guess makes sense given the location, but it does lack the kind of vibrancy seen in the Xbox 360 and even the PlayStation 2 version. Sound effects for the weapons are pretty weak too, and the music during missions just consists of these low frequency hums repeated almost the entire time. The kind of thing that sounds like it almost might be hypnotic and forcing someone to like subconsciously shit their pants or something. This is a substantially longer game than the console versions too. On the 360 it might take you anywhere from 4 to 5 hours to finish, but on the PC I think it's easily double that, just because of how slow the friendly AI moves around here and the amount of deaths you're gonna suffer.
I need a sit-rep.
I don't know man, like maybe I've become spoiled with modern games, especially the modern Ghost Recon games. Like, in those ones, despite all the shit they get, at least when you tell your squad to do something, they'll listen to your orders and carry it out with some sense of urgency. The few missions when you're running solo are at least a little bit better, because you don't have to deal with that friendly AI, but these also become a whole lot of trial and error. Because some of the enemy placements are put in these spots designed to deliberately fuck you up.
Surprise, motherfucker.
Outside of that though, just fundamentally it's not a very fun game to play. Movement feels slow and clunky, leaning isn't smooth either, and simply moving between stances feels delayed. Like trying to go from fully prone to standing feels like I'm controlling Robbie the goddamn robot. I've seen arthritic senior citizens move around faster than this. Overall though, it is kind of unfair to compare this to the 360 version, but even as a basic tactical shooter, I just don't think the PC version is all that good. Sitting somewhere in the middle of both these games is the Xbox and the PlayStation 2 version. Developed by Ubisoft Shanghai, and this one has the lowest rating out of the whole bunch. There's again some pretty big differences in this version. Like the PC port, this one is only a first-person shooter. There's no option to choose from a third-person view. The layout for all of these missions is again completely different, and it's not quite as punishing as the PC version is either. I mean, you still get killed pretty quickly from enemies, but you have to be standing close enough to smell their breath for that to happen. From a fair ways away, it seems to have a pretty hard time of hitting you. I don't know, maybe that draw distance for the PlayStation 2 is also affecting their aim. Instead of 3 team members, this time you've only got 1. A dude named Ramirez, only this guy is an absolute force of nature, and he just tears ass. I don't know if it's a coincidence that he's got the same name as the guy from Modern Warfare 2, but all you really need to do here is tell him to go into assault mode, which means he's going to shoot everything on sight. Then go off, make a cup of tea, and come back and bask in the sea of corpses that Ramirez leaves in his wake. Couple of times he even pulled out a missile launcher and took down an armored vehicle without me even having to tell him to. I mean, what a fucking legend.
Yeah, moving.
And I think that in this aspect, this is better than the PC version, simply because this guy is actually helpful during combat. I mean, I'd rather have one teammate who listens to me 100% of the time compared to 3 teammates who listen to me maybe 50% of the time. But look, let me just pull the game's dick out of my mouth for a second, because there are still some significant downgrades here. For starters, there's still the same amount of missions, but the missions are now broken down into multiple stages, with lots of loading screens in between, and overall it's easily the shortest game out of the bunch. You don't have any more control over your loadout either, and the supply points you find in each mission are only there to top up your health and ammo, so you've just got to use whatever the game gives you. Instead of missions often starting off with these cool fly-ins on a chopper, now it just begins on the ground, with no pomp and circumstance, and it takes away a lot of the action movie element to the whole thing. There's no reload animations for any of the weapons either. The weapon just lowers out of the screen like you're playing GoldenEye, while this little timer pops up before you can fire again. Though, in fairness, this is what they did in the older Tom Clancy games, but I mean at this point you'd kinda hope they'd include some proper animations. Obviously, it doesn't look great either, and there was just something about games made on the Xbox and the PS2 from this era that's really just made them age horribly, and this is no exception.
Mitchell, you're the baddest mother in the valley.
I don't think the controls in this one are bad. They are still intuitive, being able to swap through firing modes, change your stances, aim down sights and all that kind of stuff, and giving orders to Ramirez, like, it works pretty well.
Forming on you. Crazy out there. Don't forget to give me a heads up if you change the rules of engagement.
But the main handicap here is the frame rate. I mean, it's often in the single digits, and it just makes aiming impossible. To be honest, I haven't tested the Xbox version, but the PS2 ports always got the short end of the stick when it came to performance issues, and all I can say is that it just often stutters horribly.
I'm here, holding position.
The final boss of the game is you against a chopper being flown by the main bad guy, Carlos, and of all the times you'd want a steady frame rate, this is it. But during this whole encounter, I mean, it might be the worst that it ever performs. You've got to deal with enemies that are constantly spawning in as you run back and forth from cover to a mounted machine gun to shoot down his chopper, in between avoiding him when he fires out heat-seeking missiles. Yeah, thanks Carlos, you fucking dick. And trying to do that when you're getting under 10 frames a second is like trying to ice skate with cayenne pepper in your eyes. I mean, it really is one of the worst things I've ever experienced in my life. And I'm comparing that to the time that I got food poisoning from eating undercooked pork. There's a bit earlier on where you've got to shoot down a couple of choppers before they blow up these tanks. I mean, why the tanks don't just shoot them is anyone's guess. But anyway, trying to be accurate with your grenade launcher to shoot them down is just way harder than it should be because of the frame rate. It also has the worst ending out of all 3 games in the way that it doesn't have an ending. In the 360 version and the PC version, you get to kill Carlos in a shootout. But in the PS2 version, after finishing that final mission, you're just told in a voiceover that the guy escaped. Then it cuts to the end credits, and that's it. Okay, obviously when you compare this to the 360 and even the PC version, it is clearly inferior.
Roger.
But to be honest, I really don't think this thing is all that bad, and I'd probably even place it above the PC version, if only because I wasn't dying over and over every time I simply turned a corner. And at least in this, my AI buddy was able to listen to what orders I gave him. Yeah, I know it's a crazy concept, but I kinda like it if my AI teammates do what they're told in a game that's all about using AI teammates. It's not an amazing game, but it's really not quite as bad as people seem to make it out to be. And like the 360 version, it's over pretty quickly anyway.
Roger that.
So even if it does bring your piss to a boil, you don't have to put up with it for all that long. It just, I think, had the unfortunate luck of being a game made around the same time when that generation of consoles was just becoming obsolete. And yeah, obviously if you're going to compare it to the PC or the vastly superior Xbox 360, it's not going to score as well. Now, there were sequels made as well in 2007, which actually got released on the PS3 this time, as well as the Xbox 360. And again, a completely different version released for the PC and the PSP. I'm not going to spend another 20 minutes talking about them, but overall, the console version, again, is pretty good. It definitely feels like a by-the-numbers sequel, but then again, considering how solid the first one was, there wasn't really any glaring things that needed to be fixed. So it just kind of feels like more of the same, albeit slightly more polished and better looking. I think the biggest improvement is that with the night vision goggles, you can now actually see what you're looking at, so the world doesn't look like Bigfoot's butthole. There's some new gadgets in the form of a gun that can shoot from cover, which honestly kind of feels like cheating. The tactical maps had a bit of a facelift too, and you now have to remotely control that UAV to spot enemies. There's a hell of a lot more action sequences too, some of which are actually really impressive.
Yeah, Mitchell, damn good soldiering.
And it again just really surprised me how a 14-year-old game stacks up so well when it comes to the presentation. One of the missions takes place during a rainstorm and you're cleaning out enemy camps from a chopper with a minigun, and the whole thing just looks dope. When you're trying to extract at the end of one mission, a nearby church suddenly gets bombarded with artillery strikes, being completely demolished. And I honestly reckon this whole sequence could pass itself off as something made in 2021. There's even a really badass mission where your helmet is damaged and you're separated from the rest of your squad, on the run in the middle of the desert as the rebels hunt you down. It's tense, challenging, and just really fun.
Stay frosty, Mitchell. You've got buku hostiles in the zone, and they're all looking for you.
And the music again is suitably epic stuff. I mean, it's a AAA game through and through. Overall, I think it's a pretty damn good sequel, even if it is about the same length as the first game, coming in at around 5 or so hours.
What is your name, Captain?
I have no name, Colonel. I'm a ghost. And I was never here.
Understood, Senor Ghost.
With the PC version, it's again a tactical shooter, but sadly, despite it being a sequel, they didn't really seem to improve all that much. Definitely looks a lot better than the first game, and the first thing I noticed was that the lighting and the shaders seem a lot more vibrant. The night vision effect has again been updated, and this time I think it looks really believable, with just the right amount of grain and noise. The interface has also been updated quite a bit too. When you give orders to the squad now, you get these indicators as to where it's actually sending them, instead of just vaguely aiming your crosshair at something and hoping they take the hint. If a teammate is down during a mission, instead of them magically coming back to life for the next one, now they're actually going to be incapacitated for a couple of missions, which reminds me a lot of the old Rainbow Six games. And that's all well and good, except yet again the AI is completely dog shit. And it just suffers from the same stupid problems. Bad pathfinding, slow and delayed responses to your orders, and just a complete obliviousness to enemies. The second mission in the game, my guys got stuck on a staircase and weren't able to move. They just stood there running in place over and over, and I just thought, fuck, here we are again putting up with the same thing. At one point they tried to take cover behind a tree. Yeah, good one. Yeah, hey idiot, how about taking cover behind that inflatable kids pool or that stack of empty cardboard boxes? What a dumbass. You ever play that Sniper Town level in Medal of Honor Allied Assault? Well, that was the level where they put snipers on the top of buildings and in random windows to shoot at you. Now, imagine that level dragged out for an entire campaign and you've got Advanced Warfighter 2. Half the time it's some dickhead sitting in a machine gun nest staring in my direction before I've even turned the corner. It's really just a lamer version of the 360 game. Like the bit where you ambushed at the church on the 360 was this really intense standoff with your back to the wall as you had your position swarmed by this influx of mercenaries. On the PC though, it's just slower and much more boringer. Is that a word? As you take pot shots at these guys on the other side of the street. That mission where you're ambushed out in the desert and separated from your squad with a busted helmet, now instead of being by yourself, you're guided by an entire loyalist squad and even a lone ghost. And there's just no sense of urgency to get out of there. It just plays out like another standard mission. The one consolation I think this one has is that the game lets you quick save whenever you want. I mean, as long as you're not in combat. And it does alleviate some of the frustration of having your head turned inside out the moment you turn a corner.
It's a tough call, but you have to leave now.
But it's just a damn shame, man, that they still didn't hit the nail on the head when it comes to the AI. And once again, you feel more like a babysitter than a squad leader. Apparently it was illegal to sell this game in Mexico at the time, because Mexicans thought it might scare outsiders away. What scared me away the most was just how lackluster of a sequel it was. And again, it's just more of a reason to stick to the console version. Maybe at some point in the future I'll do more of an in-depth video on these sequels, but honestly there's really not much else to say about them. If you like the first game, well then the sequels are really just slightly improved versions. If you didn't like them, well then they're not going to exactly win you over. It'll be interesting to see where Ubisoft takes the franchise in the years to come, and it has been a while now since we've had a new game in the series. Just tone down the instant deaths and the machine gun nests around every corner and we should be golden.
Cross-comm activated.
Yeah, Mitchell, damn good soldiering.
Right, so if you're still watching, well, thanks for sticking around, and let me give a final shout out to my sponsor, SteelSeries. SteelSeries makes some of the best gaming peripherals, from headsets, keyboards, mice, and gaming pads, all synced together with a handy program that lets you modify the hell out of them. I'm a bit of a stickler for high quality mouses and keyboards, and whether you're playing a game that's 8 months old or 8 years old, it makes a huge difference in how well something handles. I would never recommend something that I don't use myself, and I'm pretty stoked to be able to offer a discount to people looking at buying some new gear. So just make sure to use that Chad promo code GMAN at checkout to get 12% off your next order. And as always, thanks for watching.